Hi friends, welcome to a new financial year, and on today's first video we will see why India's budget for this current financial year is already outdated even before it starts. Today marks the beginning of a new financial year 2026-2027. Usually the budget for an upcoming financial year is presented before that financial year starts, and in India it was presented on 1st February 2026 by our finance minister Sri Nirmala Sitaraman. Lots of assumptions and calculations go into the making of a budget, and of course they do leave some room for unforeseen situations. But that extra allowance was no match for the current geopolitical situation. When the budget was presented on 1st February, the global situation was calm. The inflation rate was within the target range, as we discussed in the yesterday's video. GDP growth was projected at 6.5%, and the government was all set to pump prime capital expenditure while also signaling debt reduction. But alas, as the new financial year starts, we are in a totally different situation. The US Israel Iran conflict has caused a sharp rise in oil prices, and it is going to have a wide range of cascading effects on the stability of our economy. And needless to say, many of the assumptions and calculations previously used in the budget will have to be thrown out of the window. What is pump priming? I just used a term called pump priming. In economics, pump priming means using the government spending to stimulate a sluggish economy and get private investment and demand going again. It comes from old water pumps wherein you have to first pour water into them so that you can prime them and start pumping properly. In the same way, the government pours in public expenditure to prime the economy so it can start growing on its own. Brent crude jumped from $70 per barrel to $110 per barrel. That is a 60% increase almost. Oil around the world is usually priced using two main benchmarks. As we all know, WTI, West Texas Intermediate Crude, and Brent crude. Oil produced in the Gulf region is typically priced relative to the Brent crude, that is, the price of the Brent crude plus a certain margin. The Brent itself is based on the oil produced in the North Sea, that is the region around UK and Norway. Because of the current conflict, the actual price of the Gulf region oil has risen above the Brent. That is, Brent crude itself has risen. On top of that, the spread, that is the Gulf oil, has increased much more than the Brent crude. That means India, which imports much of the oil from the Gulf, will have to pay a higher price than the quoted Brent crude, which is $110 per barrel as of today. Iran, in addition to this, has passed a law stating that it will impose tolls on commercial ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. In addition to this, Houthi rebels in Yemen have resumed their campaign against shipping in the Red Sea. This will not only impact the oil trade but also the general trade other than oil. High oil prices will increase in the general inflation, whereas our Indian rupee is depreciating, and this will cause an increase in imported inflation. That is, we have to spend more money to import the items, and that will cause inflation in the economy. The main industries affected in India include fertilizer industry. Fertilizer production depends on fossil fuels, and when the price of the fertilizer increases, it affects directly the food production of the country. Polyester industry. Polyester, a synthetic fabric made from crude oil based raw material, is an employer of a big population of our country, and whenever the polyester industry is affected, it affects the employment of the country. Steel, the backbone of Indian economy, requires limestone flux in its production process, and almost 4/5 of that comes through a single port in the Gulf, that is Jebel Ali in UAE. Such problems increase inflation, causes unemployment, and slows down growth. In addition, the government will be forced to give subsidies. Now, such subsidies is what I said as an unforeseen situation in the budget. In addition to providing these subsidies, government is currently not even fully passing on the increase in oil prices to the consumers. They do this by cutting their own share of excise duty on the fuels. This cut in excise duty will cost the exchequer 1.3 trillion rupees to 1.7 trillion if maintained for the full year. In the end, the government will find it difficult to meet the fiscal deficit target of 4.3% of GDP. Fiscal deficit means the total government expenditure minus the total revenue, excluding the borrowings, expressed as a percentage of GDP. When the RBI increases interest rate to control this inflation, economic activity tends to slow down. When the economic activity slows down, the government's tax revenue will be reduced. And when the government's tax revenue reduces, it will have to borrow more. And this again increases the government borrowing, or the fiscal deficit will be again increased, pushing the deficit target above, pushing the fiscal deficit above its target. In summary, the government is in a difficult situation because of the current geopolitical events. Therefore, the fiscal policy for the current financial year should be flexible, careful, and precise, not rigid or panicked, especially given the risks in the economy. Thank you.